In April 2025, several defense publications reported that Vietnam had quietly agreed to purchase US-made F-16 fighter jets. According to a Radio Free Asia report citing industry sources, Hanoi has reached an agreement with the United States government for the acquisition of a fleet of F-16 fighter jets, at least 24 of them, a deal that would amount to the largest ever between the two countries. Other reports added that Lockheed Martin's C-130 transport aircraft might be part of the package. If confirmed, the sale would be historic. Vietnam fought a brutal war with the US half a century ago and only began lifting Washington's arms embargo in 2016. But this isn't just historic because of Washington's arms embargo lifting, but far, far deeper than that. To understand why this is a big change, we must view this historically. Or, during the Cold War and beyond, Vietnam's military was shaped by its alliances and its fears. After reunifying in 1975 under communist rule, Vietnam relied almost entirely on the Soviet Union, and later Russia, for weapons and training. Soviet-era jets like the MiG-21/23/25 and Sukhoi Su-22 and Su-27 filled the Air Force. Soviet radars, tanks, ships, and missiles formed the backbone of its defense. Vietnam still honors veterans of the US war, but for generations after the 1970s, Soviet-style equipment dominated the inventory. Vietnam's orientation reflected its geopolitical situation. Beijing became an adversary in the 1979 Sino-Vietnam border war, so Chinese arms were unwelcome. Instead, Hanoi deepened ties with Moscow throughout the 1980s and 1990s. By the mid-1990s, Vietnam began diversifying modestly. Normalization with Washington in 1995 opened doors, but a strict US arms embargo stayed in place for 2 decades. For example, as late as 2015, the Vietnamese government was still using MiG-21 fighters. Meanwhile, it bought submarines and coastal missile boats from Russia, and Israeli radars and naval vessels for coastal defense. Notably, Vietnam contracted Russia to build 6 Kilo-class submarines, completed 2013-19, and dozens of Su-30 Mk-2 modern fighters, completed by the late 2010s. But Vietnam also hedged. It sent crews to India for submarine and Sukhoi training and sought Western sensors and patrol aircraft to cover gaps. After Chinese paramilitary ships repeatedly harassed Vietnamese fishing boats in the South China Sea, defense diversification became a higher priority. The big change came after the annexation of Crimea in 2014. Russia's global arms sales began to drop, and sanctions on Russia complicated payments. At home, Vietnam worried about overdependence on a single, increasingly unpredictable supplier. In 2016, US President Barack Obama formally lifted the 50-year ban on selling lethal weapons to Vietnam. This was part of a quid pro quo and trust building. Obama cited Vietnam's growing assertiveness against China as one reason to end the embargo. Almost immediately, Vietnamese officials started saying they would buy US surveillance planes, helicopters, and electronics to fill gaps. For example, experts noted Vietnam's wish list included the Lockheed P-3 Orion maritime patrol plane and C-130 transport for ISR roles. Vietnam even hosted its first international arms fair in 2022, publicly seeking to diversify its supplies from Moscow. Diversifying away from Russia has been official doctrine for years. As a 2016 RUSI commentary explained, Vietnam's policy has long been consistent with the country's broader foreign policy of avoiding dependency on a single state. Russia still offered low base prices, but charged heavily for maintenance. Vietnam found workarounds, even sending Su-30 crews to India for training. But the imbalance was obvious. By courting US and European equipment, Hanoi hoped not only for better tech, but also bargaining power against Moscow. In short, Vietnam's procurement strategy evolved from near-total reliance on Soviet-Russian arms toward hedging among multiple suppliers. The rumored F-16 deal is just the latest twist in this long trend. Vietnam's fighter fleet today is dominated by Russian designs. The most modern and numerous are the two-seat Sukhoi Su-30 Mk2 flankers. Each Su-30 Mk2 is a twin-engine, two-seat jet capable of Mach 2 speeds, 2,100 km per hour, and unrefueled ranges of around 3,000 kilometers. It can carry roughly 8 tons of weapons on 12 external pylons. Vietnam's Air Force also still flies older Soviet jets, like the Sukhoi Su-22M4 swing-wing fighter bombers introduced in the 1980s, are reported in the inventory. The Su-22 is a single-seat strike plane with a top speed around Mach 1.14, approximately 870 miles per hour, and a combat radius of roughly 1,150 kilometers. It has 12 hardpoints, but a lighter weapons load, roughly 4 tons total, compared to a Su-30. A few Su-27 flankers from the late Cold War era also remain. Vietnam's fighters are largely legacy Soviet jets. A US F-16, much newer design, performs maneuvers. Vietnam's Su-22 and Su-27/30 fleet are solid machines but aging. The Su-22 M4 fitter has a limited range and about 4 tons of ordnance capacity on 12 pylons. Its avionics and engines date from the Cold War. By contrast, a modern F-16V, the latest Viper upgrade, is a highly agile, single-engine multi-role fighter. It reaches Mach 2, approximately 1,500 miles per hour, and can fly over a 3,200-kilometer ferry range. It carries an M61 20mm cannon, plus up to approximately 7.7 tons of external stores on 9 to 11 hardpoints. The F-16's state-of-the-art radar and sensors, especially in the F-16V Block 70/72 variant, would greatly improve detection and targeting compared to Vietnam's older jets. However, the F-16 is unstealthy and optimized as a lightweight fighter, whereas Vietnam's Su-30 are heavier, twin-engined aircraft with longer range and two-crew operation for heavier strike missions. So, why is Vietnam buying the F-16? Vietnam's interest in US jets is driven largely by the changing security environment, especially China's assertiveness in the South China Sea. Since the 2010s, Beijing has built up large, artificial islands and military facilities on disputed features near Vietnam's claimed waters. Chinese Coast Guard and naval vessels have frequently harassed Vietnamese boats, raising the risk of an incident. Hanoi has warned that in a high-intensity conflict, it lacks the high-end weapons to defend its coasts. As Reuters reported in 2024, Vietnam lacks enough modern weapons to defend itself in a large-scale conflict, and would see the military balance increasing in China's favor if it continues to mark time. Analysts like Carl Thayer of the Australian Defence Force Academy have said the gap will widen without new arms. Under these pressures, Vietnam has prioritized ships, jets, and even armed drones to bolster its deterrence. Buying F-16s fits this logic. US officials have noted that maritime surveillance and coastal defense are high priorities for Hanoi. A senior US official told reporters that Vietnam's security relationship with Washington has been very productive, with interesting movement toward US systems that can help monitor their maritime domain. In practice, beyond the jets themselves, Vietnam is seeking ISR upgrades like patrol aircraft and sensors. Indeed, during President Biden's visit to Vietnam in September 2023, both sides elevated ties to a comprehensive strategic partnership. And US aides discussed providing maritime domain awareness platforms, transport planes, and creative financing to help Vietnam acquire high-end gear. Economics has even played a role. In early 2025, Vietnam's leaders were concerned about a huge trade surplus with the US and looming American tariffs. State media noted that Hanoi's leaders publicly said they would buy more American weapons as part of addressing the trade imbalance. While experts caution this was likely rhetoric for leverage, it underscores how strategic and economic factors intertwine. Overall, Vietnam's turn to US arms is a signal. It tells Beijing that Vietnam can now tap a second source for advanced gear, and it reminds Washington that Vietnam remains worried about Chinese power. It's a classic hedging move, acquiring asymmetric defense tools, jets, anti-ship missiles, etc., to deter China, while still avoiding a full-blown alliance. China has reacted predictably with suspicion and rhetoric. State media hammered the narrative that any US-Vietnam arms deal is a scheme to contain China. For example, China's Global Times reported on the F-16 talks by accusing Washington of hegemonic goals of containing China, and claimed such a deal would sabotage peace and stability in the region. It argued that if Vietnam switches to American jets, the US would gain another major customer from Russia and even attempt to secure basing rights, thereby stirring up more troubles to build up a military encirclement of China. A Chinese analyst quoted there warned Vietnam would risk becoming dependent on US decisions if it accepted US fighters. For Washington, a Vietnam F-16 sale would be a significant win. It would mark the first sale of modern fighter jets to a one-time Cold War foe, symbolizing how far US-Vietnam ties have come since normalization. It would also advance the US strategy of strengthening partners across the Indo-Pacific to balance China. US defense planners see Southeast Asia as a key region where showing support through arms sales, joint exercises, and security pacts can help uphold a free and open maritime order. A big-ticket sale to Vietnam sends a message to allies and rivals alike that the US is deepening its footprint beyond East Asia. But anyway, do let us know what you think. Thanks for watching.